Well, it's Christmas at the time of writing this video, and we're on the verge of ending this decade. So in case you missed my last stream while we're ending this decade, we're gonna do some makeovers. Give me a second. And there you go, some new and fresh avatars to start off this decade made by my wonderful and talented girlfriend 6760. Anyway, 2019 is rather underwhelming for video games. I mean, most of the good games that I've been playing, and most of the games on this list for that matter, only reach the dizzying heights of good. Not amazing, not spectacular, just good. There are some that exceeds that and reach the great territory, but most of them are just good. And this is a problem for a lot of people who expected this year to be a banger. Well, in some ways it is, but in other ways, it isn't. So let's end 2019 with a little bit of change and celebrate the good games of this year, or at least the games that I consider good because it's my list, it's my video, and if you don't like the games that I'm putting on the list, make your own video. Who knows? You might get big one day. So without further ado, here we go. This game came out late to the party, but managed to impress in a lot of fronts. Gameplay, story, characters, environments, and all of it is from a franchise that people are beginning to lose hope on.
In the Force.
Jedi Fallen Order is a surprisingly compelling and interesting Star Wars game. It's a game that puts you in the role of someone who doesn't play a major part in the Star Wars universe, someone who is very small and insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it's still an interesting and thoroughly enjoyable and well-made Star Wars game that managed to impress even the non-Star Wars fan me. It's a bit buggy though, so proceed with caution. This game, well, not everyone is going to like me putting this game on the list. I did say that this is my list, which means that this is going to be filled with games that appeal to me, and to me specifically. So if this game doesn't appeal to you, I totally understand why. But it's my list, not yours. So I'm putting this one here purely because this game consumed a huge chunk of my life.
The one where I was born. Come and find me.
Yep, I never thought that this game would be in my best year list. I didn't expect much out of this game, but I ended up spending a lot more time in it compared to a lot of games released this year, and I really enjoyed my time with it. Is this game going to appeal to everybody? No. Is the story of this game the best of the year? No. But I can tell you this is a game that kept me hooked from start to finish. Not because of the narrative, although it is somewhat intriguing, but because I really like the delivery simulator gameplay loop. I also really like the combat, even if it's a bit too easy. You might not like it, and I can totally understand why, but this is a game that made me to ignore my responsibilities for 6 to 7 hours straight, and it's quite rare for games to do that to me. So good job Death Stranding for impressing some and not others. It's really strange how people took my criticisms on Epic as if to say that I'm not buying their games in that platform. Epic is not a good launcher and I criticize it a lot, but I never said that I won't buy any games from it. I just prefer to buy it through Steam. Epic managed to steal a lot of games, and unfortunately some of them are actually good. Looking back, I kind of feel like Metro Exodus takes many cues from a lot of post-apocalyptic stories, but despite all of that, it's still a fantastic game, not just on the looks, but also on the story. The writing is very strong with this one. I am genuinely intrigued by the character's journey. I just wish that Artyom would speak up anywhere other than the loading screens. It's a very atmospheric game that does give you the comfort and also the creeps, and I really enjoyed it, even if I have to get through a bad launcher. This is a game from a genre that I'm really not that familiar with. Other than playing one game of the series on the PS2 and enjoying it still, I'm not familiar with the genre of this game whatsoever, and unfortunately, it's a rather dying genre as of late. But still, this is a game so good that anyone who isn't familiar with the genre can still enjoy it just fine, so I'd give huge props on that, which is why it's on my list.
Can you hear me? Pilot with the 3 strikes.
Ace Combat 7 is a fantastic return to the Ace Combat series. After the dud that was Assault Horizon, people are expecting Ace Combat for a return to form, and this game certainly is a welcome return. Aside from the really intense classic Ace Combat gameplay, I surprisingly really enjoyed the story, less on the cutscene bits and more on the in-combat storylines. I really like the interaction and the banter between the pilots. They do carry emotional weight at times, and the game runs very well on my GTX 1050 laptop at 1080p 60fps. I can safely recommend this game at full price if you're into that sort of game. If you're not, get it at half price and enjoy it for what it is. Here's a spot reserved for a game that could have been so much higher on the list if it had been released in platforms that can truly unleash its potential. This is a game that was constrained with the limitation of its hardware, but they have to limit it because the console publisher funded it, and that's just great. But regardless, there's no denying to me that this game is quite fantastic. Astral Chain might not have the best story, but the gameplay is pretty fun and unique. I really like the way it utilizes the chains. I really like how the combat is full of spectacle, as expected from a Platinum game, but still challenging nonetheless. I absolutely adore the universe that the game takes place in. The game looks absolutely stunning and pretty. The soundtrack is really damn good as well. If only it can be in a platform that can better utilize the graphical capabilities, but regardless, Astral Chain is a good game and I really loved it. There's one game developer that managed to make a redemption arc this year by releasing very successful and critically acclaimed games for the past couple of years that people absolutely love. Some of their games are on this list, so let's start with the first one.
Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry 5 is an example in what would happen if a game company just gives the fans what they wanted. They wanted a proper Devil May Cry sequel that doesn't take itself too seriously but still very fun and challenging to play through. They do not want another installment of 9-year-old Dante. It's an incredibly fun hack and slash game that you can play over and over and over again to get good grades and upgrade your characters with. It's definitely worth that $60 asking price, and if you can get it on a discount, it's a great freaking deal. Nothing much that I can say about this game that anyone else hasn't said, but there's one thing that we know for sure.
DMC's back! Thank you!
There are 3 Soulsborne games that enter the best game of the year, and while this one doesn't impress in the storyline department, even though it focuses on it, this one managed to impress in the visual presentation. Combine that with a more casual and relaxed Soulsborne gameplay, this is a visually stunning and entertaining ride. Code Vein isn't exactly the most amazing Soulsborne game, but it's definitely one of the prettier ones. The anime character customization of Code Vein is one of the best in the business. You can use that to make your own dream waifus or husbandos. Aside from that, the gameplay is really damn good, even if it's easier compared to any other Soulsborne games, but it's the visual presentation and the character design that truly sells me on this game. This one shouldn't be a surprise, one of the very few games on this year that I can safely recommend for $60. The game is chock full of content and hundreds of hours of excellent gameplay filled with memorable characters that manage to stick to my memories, but it's a Switch exclusive, which is why it's a little bit lower than the next two games, and it's quite nice putting this game on number 3. What can I say about Fire Emblem Three Houses that anyone else hasn't said? This game has the most compelling, most memorable, and the most memeable characters of this year. It's an excellent tactical RPG that is mostly catered to the people who are new to the series, so the hardcore Fire Emblem fans might be disappointed at how easy this game is. Me, I'm not much of a tactical RPG guy, but this game is still pretty fun to play. I just wish that the game can have better performance because the game doesn't run very well on portable mode or just be on other platforms already. This one shouldn't be a surprise. It's a game that gained the most critical acclaim this year and with very good reasons. Remember when I talk about the game developer that went through a redemption arc? What can I say about the Resident Evil 2 remake that anyone else hasn't said? It's an absolutely amazing game, a very faithful remake of the second game that brings back a lot of memories of me playing the second game, or Outbreak File 2 because there's a level for the police station in there too. While I don't think the game is that scary, it's still a very intense game that requires a lot of micromanagement. The game has tons of interesting secrets and additional game modes that you can play. Resident Evil 2 Remake is a great game, and I cannot wait for the remake of the third game next year. Now before we get to my number 1 game of the year, I have a couple of quick comments on other games that didn't make it into my favorite lists. The Outer Worlds. You might be wondering why this game isn't on the list, and that's because, for me at least, the game is just fine. It's not amazing, it's not horrible, it has tons and tons of flaws, but also tons and tons of strengths. I enjoyed the game for what it is, but it's not really my favorite game of this year. The Somnium Files. I did say that I really enjoyed this game, it's a really entertaining cringe fest, but my best game of the year? No. Control. It's a very trippy game with a surprisingly fun combat, but Control only ends up being this year's Tomb Raider, as in solid gameplay with a meh story that only serves as a good benchmarking utility as opposed to a video game that I'd recommend you to buy. Our World is Ended. This is a visual novel that I really enjoyed this year. It has tons of trash weeb humor with an incredibly over-the-top ending that is quite memorable for this year. Not only that, but it has the best soundtrack out of all the games that I played this year. Soundtrack so good, I'm using it for the intro for this video. However, the game is way too overpriced for what it tries to offer. If you can get this game for $20, I might actually recommend it, but for $60? Nah. Disco Elysium. It's an old school role-playing game, but if you're not familiar with old school role-playing game, it's basically a visual novel RPG. You take the dialogue skill checks in Fallout and make an entire game out of it, an entire narrative-driven game out of it. The mechanics of the game are pretty unique, and I really want it to exist more in other games. So why is this game not in my list? Because I simply haven't finished the game, because it overwhelms me with way too much quests, and the game just kind of lost focus at that point. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. This is a very good Metroidvania game that I really enjoyed, but like Disco Elysium, I haven't finished this one. Kind of lost interest in finishing it, but I can't really specify why though. You might enjoy this one, you might not. A Plague Tale: Innocence. It's an interesting narrative-driven game with very stunning graphics that manage to encapsulate the time period of where it took place, but I also haven't finished this one because I just lost interest after the first few chapters. My first impressions on the game's narrative was not that great, so you might like or might not like this game. Atelier Ryza, definitely one of the most beautiful looking JRPGs that I played in a while, but I still hate the fact that Koei Tecmo doesn't give us poor Indonesians a little bit of break and sells their games at a completely full and fat $60. No thanks. Defen Request, do you want a game like Hyperdimension Neptunia, but you want it to be 10 times edgier? Well, this game is for you. I haven't finished this one, so I couldn't really make any proper judgments, but first impressions left me surprised and intrigued, so yeah. My Friend Pedro, while the shooting mechanics are insanely fun and rewarding to play, that's the only strength about this game. The rest are either fine or just not as good. Rage 2. Does anyone actually remember this game being a 2019 game at all? I don't think so, which is a shame because I really enjoyed Rage 2. It's by no means a perfect game, but I really like the voice protagonist and I really like the core shooting and driving gameplay. I just don't like anything else about the game, which is why I didn't finish it. Trails of Cold Steel 3. Cold Steel 1 and 2 are my favorite games of all time and I've been hearing nothing but heap of praise for the sequel. It's just that I prefer to continue my Trails of Cold Steel journey once this game finally hits the PC. That's how I started my journey and that's how I would want to continue the journey, which is why you're not seeing any gameplay footages. Terminator Resistance. Good job, developers of Rambo the video game, for making a game that is surprisingly not as bad as your last one, but despite that, you can clearly tell that this game is developed by a small and developing studio, especially when you don't have a freaking FOV slider in the options menu, and it defaults to around 70 so that you can make my eyes hurt. Thank you so much, game. Okay, those are all the mentions, now let's get into the real deal. This one shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who have been following my channel. I mean, I'm pretty much a fanboy on this game. Does this game have a good and compelling story with interesting characters? Not really, but what it does have is a very engaging, challenging, and ridiculously fun gameplay that I have ever experienced throughout the year. And what do you know, the Game Awards managed to pick a good game for its Game of the Year. Oh, Sekiro. I never thought that I'm going to get good at this game, but I did, or at least I improved significantly. I grew, I improved, I didn't take a shortcut, and I gained everything. I experienced a sweet victory. All was risk and everything was gain. While I agree that this is more of an entry-level Souls-like game for the year, it's still amazing and I want you all to experience it too. This is a game that I'm comfortable replaying over and over and over again because the gameplay is that fun, and if you have the PC version of the game, you can also mod it to your heart's content. So, yup, I love Sekiro and there's nothing that you can do to shove this game off of my #1 Game of the Year of 2019. That's all I have to say for this video. Merry Christmas everybody and Happy New Year!